What I'm about to tell you might sound like something straight out of a low-budget horror movie, but I swear on everything, this actually happened. Even back home, my family barely believes me without a full-on interrogation of the other guys involved. So buckle up, this is a long one. It all went down in the autumn of 2019 in British Columbia, Canada. I was 22 at the time, a German exchange student spending half a year there for my bachelor's degree. Barely got back before COVID hit, actually. The other guys in this story were around the same age. My buddy, another foreign student, and I had become really close with a local Canadian student. We just clicked. Same interests, same sense of humor. He quickly became one of our best friends. He told us all about the local area, and we'd even spent a week that summer at his dad's super remote cabin near some woods. Seriously, remember that detail, remote. His dad taught us how to handle guns there and let us shoot a ton. Ammo's crazy expensive, by the way. Fall rolled around, and with all our papers finished, we had a ton of free time. Our Canadian friend suggested we head back to his dad's cabin for a few days, just us. We were all, hell yeah! The plan was to load up on booze and weed, kick back, game, and just get wasted. Living the dream, right? 3 close friends, deep in the woods, no adults. What could go wrong? After stocking up on all our supplies, the first 3 days were super chill. On the first night, just like my previous visit, I barely slept. I'm naturally pretty paranoid, and I tend to go into alert mode in unfamiliar situations, which my friends always joke about. What really got to me was how incredibly far away from civilization we were. You never truly understand silence until you've spent time in a place like that. I'd often find myself standing in the dark at night, just listening to the sounds outside the cabin. But after a few days, I started to relax. I was with friends, constantly high, and we were quite armed and dangerous. Probably mostly to ourselves, honestly. Then came day 4. We spent the day attempting to hunt in the woods, mostly just chilling under trees with a beer and a rifle. But as evening approached, it started raining heavily. An hour later, we began seeing lightning in the distance. The time between the lightning and thunder told us the storm was still a ways off, but it was coming. So we aborted our less than competent hunting attempts and started trekking back to the cabin. It took us about an hour to get there. It was already pitch black, and the rain made the footing really dicey. Just for context, when you've been out in the wilderness for days, seeing no one but your friends, you tend to get a little careless about your surroundings. You can probably guess why I'm mentioning that. We finally made it back inside. The thunderstorm was raging full on. We put away our gear and changed clothes. Well, everything but our guns. Yeah, I know, drugs and guns are a terrible combo, and I wouldn't mix that stuff nowadays. But his dad had drilled trigger discipline into us, and honestly, I kind of miss spooning a rifle while sleeping. We settled down in the living room, started a YouTube video, and began playing cards. Barely 20 minutes had passed since we'd gotten back. We hadn't even bothered closing the curtains. Thunderstorms are just awesome to watch. So picture this: 3 guys sitting around a table, occasionally staring out at the chaotic weather, playing cards. It's incredibly dark out there in the wilderness. Without a full moon, it's absolute pitch black. Our cabin lamps were old and dimmer than my phone screen. What happened next is burned into my memory, and it's how my other non-local friend described what he saw. He was sipping his beer when another flash of lightning lit up the outside. He instantly spat out his beer, screamed, and shot to his feet. No words, just pure panic. My Canadian friend and I were instantly perplexed and looked at him. He started rambling, explaining that in that split second the lightning illuminated the area. He saw a person standing a bit of a distance from the cabin, looking directly at us. And here's where it sounds like a cheap horror movie cliché. This is why no one believes me at first. But I promise you, this actually happened. My friend was clearly in full-blown panic. His face was pure anxiety. This instantly told our Canadian buddy and me that he wasn't messing around. He genuinely saw someone out there. I grabbed my rifle and racked around into the chamber. That warm sensation of adrenaline surged through my body. I tried to stay clear of the window, staring into the oppressive darkness outside, but I couldn't see a thing. Our Canadian friend rushed to his room to grab his pistol, and that's when I started panicking even more. We hadn't locked the door. Why would we? We hadn't seen anyone in days, and we were in the middle of nowhere. I sprinted to the door and locked it. Our friend returned with his pistol, which had a flashlight attached. He cautiously approached the window, then suddenly changed pace, pushing the window open with one hand while aiming the handgun outside. I wish I could draw, because what we saw next when he clicked on that flashlight was the most terrifying image I have ever witnessed. It seared into my mind. The fact that I can't share that image with others has been bugging me for years. The light flickered on. What we saw in that moment was a man, tall and slim, dressed in all black, with a hooded raincoat pulled so far over his head it almost covered his eyes. He wasn't far from the cabin, just a few steps from the window. And he wasn't standing, as our friend had yelled earlier. He was crouching, looking directly at us with his eyes clenched and a terrifying little smirk on one side of his mouth. Another lightning flash. We were all frozen. The image must have shocked the other guys as much as it did me, because no one spoke for several seconds. There's a hard-to-explain, dreadful feeling about seeing something like that. In a storm, in the middle of nowhere, a person dressed in a black raincoat suddenly crouching so close to you and facing you. Our Canadian buddy, with his pistol and attached flashlight, aimed at the also frozen, crouched, smirking man, finally yelled out. His voice was slightly stuttered and higher pitched than I'd ever heard it from him. Get the Fadion away from us or we will shoot." I guess at that moment, as his eyes adjusted, the raincoat man realized that wasn't just a flashlight. It was a gun, and I was standing right next to my friend, holding a hunting rifle. The raincoat man's slight smirk shifted into something I can't quite describe. Shock, or maybe rage. All of this happened in less than a minute. While my friend kept yelling and I just stood there, frozen, the raincoat figure turned about 90 degrees toward the nearest tree line and went from crouched to a full sprint, vanishing to the right of our window. Two of us poked our heads out the window to see where he went, but with the heavy rainfall and the darkness, we could barely make out anything in the distance of that tree line. After a few minutes of just staring at each other in disbelief, we decided to fire off a few rounds outside the window, partly to prove we were serious, partly to cope. When the initial shock wore off, we decided to call the police. They asked a ton of questions to describe the cabin's location and the man who'd just almost crept up on us, totally unsuspected, only revealed by lightning and pure luck. Because we were in such a remote area, the cops told us it would take at least 1 or 2 hours for anyone to get out there. Given the weather and the time, they asked if it would be okay if they sent someone out tomorrow to get all the details. They figured since the man saw we were armed, he probably wouldn't come back. We agreed. We discussed just jumping in the truck and leaving right then, but we were too lazy to refuel it. The thought of doing that now, in the dark and that heavy rain, was just too terrifying. I kept imagining this guy lurking in the darkness, picking us off one by one. We spent the night sleeping in shifts. One person was awake and on guard, while the others at least attempted to sleep. When it was my turn, the rain had died down. I turned off all the lights, opened a window, and just sat there in the darkness, trying to listen for any sound, scanning the area outside the windows. Let me tell you, when you're sitting in the dark for hours in full alert mode, trying to stay still, listen, and look around, you have a lot of time to think and replay what just happened. Around midday the next day, 2 cops arrived. We had to give them a detailed report of what happened, when it happened, and show them the direction the raincoat shade ran off to. They said they'd organize a patrol to comb through the woods, but it might take a while since they needed experienced outdoorsmen. Sadly, we didn't see many details of the man's face. We couldn't tell if he was young or old, only that he was tall and clean-shaven. The chances of finding out who exactly that was and what the hell he was trying to do were very slim. Though one of the officers did express that the whole incident was deeply worrying, we left the cabin a few hours after the police did, and our Canadian friend's dad insisted we stay at his place for at least a day until we felt safe again. He also wanted every last detail and decided it was time to install cameras around the cabin. I don't remember this for sure, but I think I heard later that the dad and his brother actually went back to the cabin and just sat there in the dark, waiting for the raincoat man to return. I never heard of any results, so I guess he must have gone hunting in other areas. I never heard from those cops again. The next January, I left Canada and returned home. My Canadian friend was called in for an interview a few months later. It seemed like the police were still seriously investigating this, still looking for the guy who crept up on a cabin during a thunderstorm. The image of that crouched raincoat figure, completely wet and surrounded by darkness, so close to our cabin, is burned into my mind. I will most likely never forget it. I still sometimes turn off all the lights and just look out the windows in silence, trying to listen for sounds. Even though I'm on the other side of the world now, we've speculated a lot about what that was all about. Our winning theory is that this guy most certainly had sinister intentions. This didn't look like just an attempted burglary. Remember, we had dim lights on. You could see there were people inside the cabin. This guy was creeping toward us in a raincoat during a thunderstorm. When my friend yelled that he saw someone, this guy went from walking, standing, to crouching, and he actually moved closer to the window. I suspect the raincoat man wanted to check what kind of victim was on the menu, and I really don't want to imagine what he had in store if there were 2 unarmed girls there, in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. We didn't see any headlights passing the clearing where the cabin was. The guy also didn't have a backpack or anything, just the raincoat and black, weather-appropriate clothing. I'd bet my soul that this guy was a man on a mission, who knew exactly what he was doing and what he was well prepared for. While writing this, I also started thinking about the logistics. The guy must have a camp, or at least a car hidden somewhere in those woods. You can't sustain yourself out there otherwise. I also got the feeling that he either came upon the cabin during the storm itself, or that he spotted us in the woods during our hunting earlier. We moved slowly, and we weren't shy about waving our flashlights around. In total pitch-dark wilderness, a proper flashlight must have been as easy to spot as the beacons of Gondor. So he might have tracked us through the woods until we reached the cabin. My house is just a couple hundred meters from a small church in the suburbs. Growing up Christian, I was never truly religious. Church was just something my parents dragged me to as a kid. After my dad died when I was a teenager, we stopped going altogether. Then, it was only if my friends wanted me to tag along. Now I'm 21, and the only reason I even pass that church is because there's a dirt road next to it that leads to a parking lot, which is right next to a major road. It's the quickest way to catch a bus to work, closer than the village gate in the opposite direction, and it's just one bus. Earlier that week, a storm was announced, but that Thursday morning, leaving for work, the sky was perfectly clear, sprinkled with stars. No umbrella needed. I hopped over the parking lot gate. It's chained shut until 6 for the first mass, but the guard doesn't mind. The church staff knows my family. I'm a line cook at a hotel, a demanding job. I leave before sunrise and usually get home long after sunset. The only time I see the sun is if I'm working the buffet station, which has a poolside view. That day was your average, overworked and underpaid kind of day. No buffet for me. I was stuck in the windowless kitchen. So I was pretty surprised to see flooded streets when I clocked out. Apparently it had been pouring all afternoon, finally subsiding around sunset. It was about 8 p.m. when I left the hotel, and in my country, flooded streets mean traffic is going nowhere for at least a couple of hours. This wasn't unusual. I'd dealt with it before. Plus, it meant I could sleep on the bus, so it wasn't too upsetting. Fast forward to around midnight, and it's pouring again. I wasn't far from the church parking lot, and the bus hadn't moved in 10 minutes, so I decided to get off and walk. Phone and wallet went into my waterproof backpack, along with a spare shirt, my house key, and my knife set. I didn't mind getting wet. The parking lot gate was chained shut by then, but I climbed over it like always. The parking lot was knee-deep in water, and there was no security guard at the outpost. Figured he'd retreated into the church. It was dark, but I focused on the tiny lights of houses in the distance, just dots from that far off. I trudged through the open parking lot, which could have passed for a kiddie pool, when I heard this strange sloshing from the far corner to my left. The heavy rain made it hard to see clearly, but I knew I wasn't alone. All the lot lights were off. My only guides were those distant house lights and my memory of the area. It's a straight shot to the dirt road, so I didn't need a light source. The sound of the rain was a dull static, so that sloshing stood out. I could make out the shape of a person, seemingly sitting, so only the waist up was visible. As I got closer and my eyes adjusted, I could tell it was a woman by her long hair and curvy outline. She was flailing her arms, splashing water, and grunting as she pounded her fists. She was about 2 car lengths away, so I wasn't too concerned. I've dealt with crazy people before. I glanced over a few times as I passed her and got to the dirt road. Unnerving, for sure. She was out of sight now, and the mud made walking tough. The water was only ankle deep, but my shoes kept sinking, forcing me to jerk my foot free with each step. A small splash made me look over my shoulder. In the darkness of that dirt road, the woman was splayed out, face first in the shallow water. I froze, debating whether to help. I hated the thought of being the guy who let someone drown in 6 inches of water. She was about 10 steps away. Before I could decide, she started to move. It was too dark for details, but her outline was clear enough to see she was looking up at me. She slowly got onto her hands and feet, like she was about to stand, but her hands lingered on the ground, rump in the air. I was already scared stiff. My legs wouldn't work. I thought about reaching for my knives, but I was too afraid to move. Then she started crawling toward me on her hands and feet. That sent a jolt through me, and suddenly I was sprinting toward my house. I could hear splashes behind me, along with her coarse breathing, almost like she was coughing. Tears filled my eyes and the rain blurring the distant house lights, but I knew then that I was running for my life. I couldn't tell if she was gaining, but I didn't dare look back. Then I heard her yell. Her voice was so rough it sounded like a pig squeal, short, sharp, and loud. A wordless shout of anger. I think that was the fastest I've ever run. At that point, all I could hear was the rain, deafening, unrelenting, violent. My house was close. I sped past a few houses with their dim porch lights. I was on asphalt now. I didn't know when I lost my shoes, but they were back on the dirt road. One last bend, and I was at my doorstep. I tore my backpack zipper open, fumbling inside for the key, frantically looking around to see if she was still chasing me. I got inside, slammed the door shut, and collapsed. I don't recall the rest of that night. But when I woke up the next morning, in my bed, my older brother filled me in. He'd been awake when I got home and went to the front door when the noise alerted him. He said I was on my knees, leaning against the door, quietly sobbing. He woke Mom, and they tried to console me, but I wouldn't talk. They asked questions. I just shook my head. They got me into dry clothes and led me to bed. Over breakfast, I explained what happened. Mom said she'd notify the village guards. I could tell they were concerned for my safety, but they didn't understand the fear I felt. My brother even joked about it. I didn't go to work that day. In fact, I took the rest of the week off because I caught a fever. The guards did a minor investigation, even increased patrol for a while, but they didn't find anything but my shoes in the parking lot. When I got better, I started taking the long walk to the main village gate for work. Going home, I carpool with a buddy now who can get me close enough that I don't have to use the dirt road. On days he can't drive, I take a taxi, even if it hurts my pocket a bit. I can't walk alone anymore without glancing over my shoulder every 5 seconds. Sudden loud noises make my heart jump. I can't stand the sound of rain. I've been getting better though. I can sleep with the lights off now. I just wish I would stop seeing the crawling woman's shape when I start drifting off to sleep. I wish I could tell you more about her. I honestly do. Because it's one thing to be afraid of something, but when you lack the understanding of what you fear, your mind fills in the blanks with terrifying detail. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Tonight, I've got a story for you that still gives me chills to this day. It happened when I was about 12 years old, and it was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. I still don't have all the answers, and honestly, I hope I never will. It was a weekend, and like any 12-year-old, I was taking full advantage of it by staying up super late. My dad worked the graveyard shift, so he wasn't home. Around midnight or 1 a.m., he called to tell me to lock up and head to bed, which I did. I crawled into bed, exhausted, and finally drifted off. But that sleep didn't last long. I woke up suddenly, around 2 a.m., to a distinct knocking sound coming from our back door. It startled me, but after a moment, I figured it had to be my dad. Maybe he forgot something? I was half asleep and honestly, a little annoyed. He always had his house key on him, so I just thought, he'll let himself in. But the knocking continued. It was a bit persistent. And then it stopped. A few seconds later, it started again, but this time it was at a different location. Someone was knocking on our kitchen window. My sleepy brain was still trying to rationalize it as my dad, but a growing unease started to settle in. Why wouldn't he just use his key? Why was he moving around the house? If it was him, he'd usually just call my phone, which was right next to me. The knocking moved again. Now it was at another window, closer to the front of the house. By this point, I was officially freaked out. My heart was starting to pound. I was too scared to get up and check. I just lay there, frozen, listening to the unsettling rhythm of the knocks. Then, the knocking shifted once more, moving to the front door, and it was much harsher this time. That's when the real terror set in. I realized I couldn't move. I was completely paralyzed, couldn't scream, couldn't speak, couldn't even twitch a muscle. My heart felt like it was going to drop out of my chest as the knocking continued to move, getting closer and closer to my bedroom window. My curtains were pretty thin, so I knew if someone was looking in, they'd be able to see me. I still couldn't move. The fear was absolutely consuming me. I could only lie there, helpless, slowly, agonizingly. I managed to shift my eyes towards the window, and that's when my heart stopped. Peering through my window, I saw a tall man with a dark ski mask. It was hard to make out details in the darkness, but I think his mask had some sort of skeletal design on it. He tilted his head slightly, just staring in. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. My throat was completely constricted by terror. I squeezed my eyes shut as hard as I could, repeating to myself over and over, "It's not real. It's not real." I opened my eyes, hoping it was just a nightmare, and for a moment, I thought it was over. There was no one there. I let out a shaky sigh of relief until I heard a loud, chilling whisper right next to my ear. It said, "I'll cut you." Everything suddenly stopped. The terror, the paralysis, it all just lifted. I could finally move again, though I was shaking uncontrollably. Needless to say, I didn't sleep another wink that night. It didn't feel like a dream. I'd never experienced sleep paralysis before, and this felt too real, too vivid. I still don't know what happened, but I pray I never have to experience anything like that again. It was, without a doubt, one of the most frightening moments of my entire life. The next morning, when my dad got home from work, I asked him cautiously if he had come back early or knocked on the doors and windows. He hadn't.